With me, our political editor and Andrew. Joe Hockey said to the Parliament back in 2013, General Motors, you're either here or you're not. Well, as it turns out, 7 years later, they're not.
Yeah, and I think there were threats to leave the country at the time, weren't there? But, you know, subsidies being cut, this sort of thing, after recommendations from the Productivity Commission, and eventually down the track we see it. Very interesting there in terms of the minister expressing disquiet with when the government was informed. Obviously, the Prime Minister was informed. The Prime Minister held a press conference this morning. The suggestion there is after the press conference, the Prime Minister became informed, I guess, and then the Minister was sent out as opposed to, say, the Prime Minister or the Treasurer. So the narrative now is it's Holden's fault. Holden have done the wrong thing. That's what the government have to go with. This is quite an iconic thing. This will hurt the federal government a little bit, even if they've got nothing to do with it, because a lot of Australians will be unhappy to see Holden go. They'll be unhappy to see another sort of dent in the manufacturing industry here. A lot of the political narrative's been around manufacturing, you know, talk about coal-fired power stations in order to fuel aluminium smelters, Kieran. The suggestion being, let's stop getting our raw materials off and having other people make things. Let's do some of it ourselves. And here's another hammer blow to that.
Yeah, as you say, an iconic brand as well, gone. We'll have more reaction to that in a moment. First, though, I want to touch on another story you've got this afternoon, some polling which has picked up the public mood around the bushfires. What can you tell us?
This is polling by a national communications and research firm. I've been asked to keep their identity secret, but it is credible polling, and it speaks to why Prime Minister Scott Morrison's been talking the way he has on the bushfires, Kieran, about hazard reduction, even about building dams, not about reducing emissions. It's a poll conducted between January 31 and 4th of Feb, 1,500 people, 1,000 in the cities and 500 in the bush nationwide. And it's shown the main factors people see when it comes to contributing to the bushfires are the drought, inadequate management of fuel loads, followed by inadequate state and federal government planning. Before some of the Prime Minister won't be very happy about the federal government planning aspect. But climate change comes in at a lowly ninth. 61% of people saw that as contributing a fair bit or a lot, compared to drought 85%, fuel load 75%, federal government planning 70%. Let's look at something else that this poll found. Despite that finding, it found that what was most important for government to do in terms of a reaction, emissions reduction 65%, adaptation 35%. If we move on, what's worrying Australians generally in terms of issues? Let's have a look at that. The drought is at 96%, bushfires at 95%, cost of living 92%, cost of electricity 86%. Why we hear a lot more about power prices than we hear about climate change. Cost of housing 86%, performance of the banks 85%, state of economy 84%, and climate change, it's rising its rating, but it's down at 81. Interestingly, waste and waste management's 84. It's above climate change, and we've heard Scott Morrison talk a lot here about wanting to do more on waste. You sort of wonder why when you thought climate change might be a bigger environmental issue. That's why, according to this poll at least, that is a bigger issue, waste. So we've heard Scott Morrison talk about, as I say, building dams and hazard reduction as ways to deal with climate change, as sort of climate mitigation. Let's hear what he said in Parliament last week about that.
Taking action on climate change isn't just about taking action on emissions. It's about taking action on climate resilience. It's about taking action on climate adaptation. It's about taking action on hazard reduction, which is a form of climate resilience. It is about building dams, like, Mr Speaker, the billions of dollars we're investing in those projects through the national water grid. Building dams is climate action now. Hazard reduction is climate action now.
So there you go. We saw this kind of shift in language in January from the Prime Minister, Kieran, to talk a bit more about a fluid climate change policy. And then he went hard into hazard reduction and building dams and this sort of thing. We've heard that last few weeks. I'd suggest this research, similar research he might have something to do with this. In terms of the changes to response people want, and again we look at that Bushfires Royal Commission and what it's seeking to do, let's have a look at the response there. 86% of people want to ensure the Defence Force has a bigger role in these disasters. 83% want financial incentives for households to install solar and home batteries. 79% want fast tracking of renewables and Snowy 2.0. 78% a national fleet of water bombing aircraft. Well, we've heard the Prime Minister cop some flack over that. 76% want volunteer firefighters paid. We've heard the Prime Minister cop some flack over that. 76% though want more dams built. So he's onto something there, the PM. And finally, and interestingly, given the debate over the last couple of days, 66% want a net zero emissions target by 2050. The Nationals have said they don't want this. Michael McCormack's said that. Moderate Libs like Jason Feliski have said on Sky that they do want this. We can see here that 2/3 of the population actually want that, but it doesn't rate as highly as some of those other issues when it comes to dealing with this crisis, Kieran.
And a very telling grab there from Parliament, almost word for word some of the polling that you picked up. Thanks, Andrew. We'll talk to you at the top of the hour.